Welcome. My name is Paul Gronke, and this is another in a series of videos on resilient elections. Resilient elections features talks that focus on research that can help to improve and ensure a safe, secure, accessible, and resilient election in 2020 and beyond. We're interested in highlighting cutting-edge and policy-relevant research and election administration improvement practices that speak to emerging problems in elections and reform that are arising out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to demonstrate the value and lay out successful pathways to academic and administrative partnerships that can help identify solutions for elections both now and into the future. We hope to contribute to a national effort that the 2020 elections are safe, secure, and accessible to all Americans. And I'm joined by my colleagues this week, Michael Alvarez of the California Institute of Technology and Lisa Bryant from California State University at Fresno. Welcome, Lisa and Mike.
Thank you.
So just as a way of a little more specific intro for Lisa, she's in the political science department at Cal State University Fresno, just a little ways north of me here in Pasadena. I've known Lisa for quite some time. I believe we might have met. Oh, you just started graduate school when we first met. Is that correct?
That's right. My first year of graduate school.
And that would have been, I think, I was in New Mexico working on an elections project with Lonnie Atkinson.
That's right, the election audit.
Yeah,
project.
The election audit project. Yeah, and then eventually I was on Lisa's dissertation committee as well.
That's right.
Which just seems like yesterday. But even though it seems like yesterday, Lisa, you've got some really important news that if you don't mind letting our viewers know.
Yes, so just last week, I received my promotion and tenure at Fresno State.
Congratulations.
And congratulations. Yeah, and that's just a huge honor. And it's, we're very happy for you and very proud of you too. So I really want to congratulate you on that accomplishment. That's remarkable in today's world. To become a tenured faculty member is just an amazing experience. So congratulations, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and thank both of you actually for being very supportive and good mentors in the election sciences.
Well, Lisa, working with people like you makes that easy. So thank you. Now, one thing that I think would be fun to start with, as a fellow Californian, California, as we know, the governor has issued two executive orders at this point, I believe, saying that, all the counties in the state will be issuing vote by mail ballots. But there will also be significant in-person voting opportunities in all counties as well. Now, this is not directly related to California's Voter Choice Act, but I think the Voter Choice Act counties, like Fresno County, probably have a lot of important lessons and best practices for other counties as they're considering these transitions in the fall. You've been studying Fresno intensely, and could you describe for us a little bit like what a Voter Choice Act or VCA county is, and what does it mean in the context of election administration in California?
Okay. So for people who don't know, the Voter Choice Act was passed in 2016, and it really was sort of the brainchild of our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. And he actually lobbied really hard for it. And the Voter Choice Act is a piece of legislation that allows counties to opt into modernization of their elections, or almost a complete overhaul of the way that we run elections in California. So Voter Choice Act does three key things. It moves us from a precinct model of voting where you're geographically tied to a specific location to a vote center model where you can vote anywhere in the county. It greatly expands the number of days of early voting because some non-Californians might not know that early voting was pretty non-existent in California prior to Voter Choice Act. Most counties you could vote only at the clerk's office early, but there wasn't widespread opportunity for early voting. So it expands the number of days of early voting. And then it also, and probably the biggest change and the one that has the most lessons going into fall 2020, is that every registered voter receives a vote by mail ballot. Everybody who's registered to vote by the deadline receives a vote by mail ballot. And then those can be turned in via the U.S. Postal Service, obviously, but also at drop boxes placed around the county or at vote centers themselves. And so That's one of the biggest changes it does. There's a couple other little meaningful changes that are in there as well. I guess I shouldn't call them little. It allows for conditional same-day voter registration, which actually really greatly reduces the number of provisional ballots. And that's sort of one of the unintended positive consequences of the law. And we can talk about that more if you want as well. But I think that, you know, in the context of election administration, it creates some positives for the election administrator in that they are going to get more votes by mail, which from an election administrator perspective means that you can start processing those ballots earlier, hopefully if people return them early and try and get ahead of the game, which in California with the massive number of ballots we have should be an improvement. But it also reduces the number of physical locations they have. So like for a place like Fresno County, we went from 200 physical locations that the clerk had to set up and manage and recruit, you know, poll workers for, down to 50, because it's based on your population and your population density, how many locations you're required to have. So it really, in some ways, makes for a more manageable system for the election administrator.
So what lessons do you think the Fresno Experience has for you know, many of the other counties that haven't participated in the VCA as they're looking forward to you know, to November 2020?
Well, I think there was a couple key things that Fresno learned. So we first implemented it, 5 counties implemented it in 2018, but we were one of the 2020 counties that adopted the policy here. And so a couple of things that I think were really important, and one of the things I've looked at in my research is how different counties promoted the change. How are they making the public aware of the change? And there are counties that have really embraced sort of a mass media approach using advertising and, you know, bus wraps and things like that to make people aware of the change. And then there's ones that have, like Fresno County did, tried to work social networks and tried to get the word spread more through community-based organizations and things like that. So basically going out to all of these public meetings and say, will you please let all of the people in your organization, on your listserv, know about these changes? And so more of a grassroots effort. And they didn't have the budget to be able to have sort of a big media campaign. And that resulted in hearing lots of voters say they didn't really know about the changes until the week of the election. So they didn't know that they didn't have a precinct-based location anymore. They didn't realize that everybody was going to get a ballot in the mail, or, you know, that they could vote 10 days early. So one of the key things we found here was the vote centers were empty. I mean, they sat empty for 9 days leading up to election day, and poll workers were like, we were bored stiff, right? Didn't have anything to do. And a lot of people just didn't know that that was an option, that they could go and vote early. I mean, it was a little bit weird because we were a Super Tuesday state, and so there was still some uncertainty. So I understand on the part of the voter, they might have wanted to push their vote off as long as possible because, you know, you had so many Democratic candidates still in the race, and then right before Super Tuesday, a bunch dropped out, and so that made people maybe want to hold off on casting their ballot. But I know from speaking to the poll workers perspective was like, people just didn't know they could come vote, and the vote centers were empty, you know. So I think getting word out about early voting and spending some of that media money on trying to have an early vote push would probably benefit counties.
So Lisa, you know, we're recording this on another primary day, and you probably have seen the same things I have in the news this morning, very long lines in Georgia. They had to eliminate a lot of polling places because they were unable to recruit enough poll workers. Even though they did have quite a big jump in vote by mail, there's sort of a management practice challenge, I think, in Georgia, undeniably, because people are waiting 3, 4, 5 hours in line. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about if you were speaking to a young academic. This is one of, by the way, the benefits of tenure, if we could call it that, which is mentoring younger colleagues.
Wait, does it mean I don't get to be young anymore?
No, you're young still.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, if you could think proactively, I'm sure many scholars are looking at what's happening in Georgia and would like to have been in a position to work in partnership with election officials to try to avoid some of these problems. But let's think more proactively and positively about California. If you are speaking to a younger academic in California, they want to build a partnership with their county or a set of counties, or perhaps with the academic network in California. How did you first strike up your collaboration? I know you worked with Lana Atkinson at the University of New Mexico. Perhaps you learned some things from Lana, but how do you strike these collaborations, and what kind of advice would you give for other researchers who are interested, either in California more broadly, about building partnerships with election administrators, and again, thinking proactively about how to avoid problems in November?
So I would say, so coming to California as a non-Californian, so already an outsider. And one thing about California universities is a lot of people are from California and want to come back to California. So there's already people who have these local connections, but I was not a Californian and had no connections to the Central Valley. So I would say for young academics, when you start at a location, there's a lot of groundwork that goes into building these relationships with election officials. So I worked the networks, so to speak. So the first thing I did is when I started we had a new faculty orientation, and at every opportunity I mentioned not only myself and what department I was in, but what kind of research I do. So one of the first opportunities I had to connect with an election official was my provost is a member of the Rotary Club, and our local election clerk is a member of the Rotary Club. And so my provost invited me to lunch to go meet our local election clerk. So I took her up on that, and she made a point to have us at the same table, and I got to speak with our election clerk and tell her about my research in New Mexico and ask if she'd ever worked with academics here at Fresno State or in the state of California, and she hadn't, and she seemed amenable to that. I also joined the League of Women Voters, who coincidentally does a lot of work with our local election clerk. And so then I started having more encounters with her sort of on a casual basis, because she and I would attend similar meetings in the community. And that's how it started. And then she created a citizens advisory panel, and I joined that citizens advisory panel. And so through that, and then through my suggestions in the panel, it sort of built confidence. And so then she was willing to collaborate. And I contacted her the first time I taught a campaigns and elections class in 2016. I contacted her and I said, I want to have my students work with your office so they get firsthand view of how elections are run. And so what kinds of positions would you allow them to serve in? And that was one of the things. And so it was really just sort of continuous, not aggressive contact, but staying on the radar and then taking advantage of opportunities that existed in the community to connect with her, and making that sort of personal connection. And so then when she became a VCA county, she reached out and said, you've sent me reports that you've done on this sort of thing before, and I want to collaborate with you because I want somebody to assess how we're doing and give us feedback external, to what we think we're doing. And so that's really how that relationship got fostered. But then I've also made connections more broadly across the state. So I go to the Future California Elections Conference, and I don't know if all states have those opportunities, but if they do, I would say take advantage of those, right? And so you meet a lot of election administrators at those conferences. And lots of times they have these breakout working sessions, brainstorming sessions. And so you end up having personal, conversations with those people. So it turns out, for example, my great uncle is from Alvarez County, California, which is quite small. And the elections clerk in Alvarez County's dad and my uncle both worked for the Farm Bureau and shared an office there. And so it's like, that's a very random, weird connection, but you have these conversations and strike up relationships with them. So I've now talked about working with election administrators in Yolo County and Alvarez County and across the state. I've also, in asking for sort of a large data request, I reached out to the Secretary of State's office and have sort of built a personal contact there with who is now the Deputy Secretary of State overseeing elections in California. So I think it's just self-advocacy and taking advantage of opportunities and, sort of not being afraid to put yourself into the election environment when those opportunities arise.
Yeah, that's great, Lisa, and thank you. Though I don't think you give yourself enough credit. Part of it is advocacy, of course, but part of it is also modesty and understanding what the election administrators need. And I noticed many of the things you said there is you provided help, you provided assistance, you provided students as poll workers or other election, help in the elections office, and building trust and confidence. That's always been a key part of part of the research process that often gets lost in this day and age when so much of our research is conducted remotely, not only in the time of COVID, but by using the internet and pulling up information that way. But face-to-face contacts really matter in this community. And one thing I want to follow up on that, Lisa, through the years you've shared with me what you've learned about the Central Valley and about that area of the country, and actually spoken quite movingly about your sense of mission, in working at Cal State Fresno. So if you could just tell us, give us very briefly an overview of the area where you live, perhaps with election administration problems, but also demographic shifts and other things. It's a very large, very important part of the country. In many ways, every piece of lettuce and avocado we eat in this country is grown in this area. So just talk a little bit about that area of the country and some of the unique challenges and opportunities there.
Okay. Fresno County is one of the most diverse counties in the country. We're about 63% Latino. And as you can imagine, Fresno State in particular, our student body, 60% of our graduates last year were first generation students. So we're about 23% white. And then Fresno was really interesting because we've been sort of an amnesty relocation center for both Armenians coming out of the Armenian genocide and for Hmong populations after the Vietnam War and during the Vietnam War. So we have a large Hmong population, a large Armenian population, a large Latino population. And so we have lots of language requirements. So thinking just about election officials, we have a lot of language requirements. I think that we're required to offer 5 languages, but we also, so we have Tagalog because we have a large Filipino population. I think so we're required 5 languages, but I think the clerk actually offers 10 languages because there's also a large Punjabi speaking population here as well. And so it makes for a lot of ballots, which is another sort of interesting thing that a lot of people don't think about, right? So maybe some people in Pennsylvania or Iowa or something, I know I worked with the Pennsylvania Secretary of State and they have to offer Spanish in 3 counties, but otherwise just English language ballots. Well, here, when you take, I think we ended up with like 80 different ballot designs due to the different districts and, water districts and air districts and all those various things. But then by the time she multiplied those by the languages, we had like 580 different ballot designs just in Fresno County, which is a lot to manage, right? So, but anyway, yes, Fresno's super interesting place. If nobody's ever been here, you're driving through the city and you're in a very urban kind of environment, lots of shopping malls and, planned communities. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of an almond orchard, right? And so we have almonds and pistachios and my university has a huge, if you look at it on a map, it looks huge and enormous, and it is, but we're the biggest, I believe, agricultural school in the state of California. I think UC Davis is slightly smaller than this, but it's huge. So it's very interesting because, I can go get fresh ice cream and milk and meat and everything right at the farm store on my campus. And yet we also have an engineering school and a nursing school and all of those things. So it's a very interesting place to be with a very diverse population. And it is one of the places, and I know this sounds really, really cheesy, but like where you can actually see sort of the effects that you're having on some students' lives, right? So we have many students who are children of immigrants who are here as farm workers. Some of them run their own farms, small organic farms, things like that. But then their student graduates and gets a job working in, political advocacy at Google, or gets a job working in the city councilor's office. And I have a student now who was homeless in high school and now works for the governor. And so you can see like the real effect of education on our students' lives. And I will say that, some schools might look down on the CSUs or whatever. But in terms of one of the metrics of improving quality of life for students, like Fresno State ranks really high. And so I'm very proud to be with the institution where you can actually see the effect of education on improving outcomes for people.
I see a future administrator, Michael. We should cut that portion.
Yeah, we should definitely, because that's definitely a track that I'll reserve judgment on that. I think Lisa's got a brilliant future, and I just want to sit back and watch it because she's speaking like an administrator.
Oh no.
But in any case, I'd like to kind of stick on this thread for a second because being at a Cal State means that you do really need to focus on integrating your research with your teaching. Teaching is a really, really important part of the CSU's mission, and I know it's an important part of what they expect the faculty to do.
Mhm.
And clearly, because you've recently been tenured, you're doing a phenomenal job engaging your students in your research and teaching. So other than the what you've discussed already about, you know, the first steps that you took to help, you know, the election officials in Fresno County, you know that you have a lot of interesting and smart students who can help them, right? How else do you integrate your research on election science and the work that you're doing in Fresno County in the classroom? And how do you bring your students into your research in a way that really engages them?
So two things. So I mentioned my campaigns and elections class, and students got to do 4 really cool things in that. And so obviously my research in talking about election administration and how elections are run, and your guys' research on early voting, I mean, all of that is in the syllabus, right, and in the curriculum. But my students in my campaigns and elections class, they can either be a poll worker, but the elections clerk actually allowed for some other interesting jobs. And so it makes for a very cool post-election discussion about what they see. I mean, because they really get to be on the ground and see elections, which they find, they always grumble when I tell them they have to do it, and then they always find completely fascinating after. So our county clerk runs a help desk where voters can call in and find out about what party are they registered and where are they supposed to vote. And we have a thing here called, and I'm sure that you do probably in LA and maybe Portland too, called county islands. And if people are not familiar with those, it's really a funny phenomenon where it's an unincorporated part of the city, but within the city boundaries. And so, you know, people go and they're like, I wanted to vote for mayor, but the mayor wasn't on my ballot. Why? And then, you know, you have to tell them, well, you live in a county island, so you don't get to vote for mayor. So my students were like, how can people not know where they live? That's crazy. But so they got to work the helpline. They could be a poll worker. She had a couple of students be runners for the election, so they could see like what kinds of things happen, what like machines going down and the consequences of lines forming when machines, you know, crash and things like that, and they run out of supplies. One place ran out of English language ballots and was trying to make all the voters vote on Spanish language ballots if they had a Spanish surname, which of course caused a problem. But so they got to do that. And then also some of them got to be voting rights advocates. So if people were having a problem, they could help community organizations try and make sure those people got to vote. But other than having them go out to that, the other thing we did this year is my students were polling observers. So they all got to go watch the process. And then we recorded information for the elections clerk and are drafting a report for her about, you know, lines. We had lots of lines in Fresno in the primary election. So we got to report on the size of the lines. We had twice during the day, the servers went down and people weren't able to be checked in as voters. And so she gave sort of carte blanche to my students to be able to talk to voters after they voted, or as long as they were not talking about the process of voting. And so just asking them about how long have you been in line? Are you planning on leaving? Are you planning on coming back? Those sorts of things. So we recorded a lot of really interesting information when they were on the ground. So that's one way. And then of course, from the academic perspective, we have some really intelligent students and who want to go to grad school and are very interested in graduate school. And so if I have the opportunity to hire them to work on, you know, data analysis with me or data collection with me, I do so. So for right now, actually, I have a student who's working on collecting information about polling places and working on learning how to geocode the voter file, so we can look at distances to vote centers versus drop boxes and things like that. So there's lots of ways, I think, to incorporate your students, and the students being on the ground, I find the students actually really enjoy that and really like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been my experience too. It's remarkable to me just how exciting it is to see a student, especially a student who's never really, perhaps even been in a polling place before, or who never's had an opportunity to engage with an election official, just how exciting it is for them, and how, you know, years down the road, you know, yourself included, you do that as a first-year graduate student or as an undergraduate, and you end up, you know, getting very excited about studying elections.
Yes.
And you know, kind of pivoting on that though, you know, there's a lot of interesting opportunities, I think, just in general, for those of us who study election administration and election technology. What do you think the big questions are for this fall? And, you know, again, you're mentoring you know, a young graduate student who's just starting out, or you know, someone who's just starting a position and really wants to work in this area, what should they be studying this fall? What kind of data should they be collecting?
I think that's a really good question, a really hard question. I think that we need to look at lines. I think we need to better understand. We know a lot about queuing and as academics, but I think we need to look better at how election administrators are taking that information and applying it. So, for example, one of the flaws that we saw and shared with the elections clerk here is, they set up like 4 or 5 check-in stations, and they had 2 printers to print ballots, but lots of places only set up 1 printer because they were saving the second printer as a backup in case the other one crashed. Well, why would you do that? That's obviously going to cause lines, right? So how do we find out what's actually causing lines, because this is a nationwide problem, and how do we communicate that information to election officials? I think that we need to look at why are people, if they have the opportunity to early vote, what is it that's causing people to hesitate to send their ballots in early or to vote early? I think, this year it's going to be a lot of vote by mail, but what is it that's causing people to hesitate? Is it really waiting for that, surprise to come out the weekend before the election or something like that? Or is it uncertainty, but maybe trying to figure out on the part of the voter motivation why they're not voting early, I think is an important question. And then I think we need to look at, I'm very interested, and Paul knows this, in voter confidence and sort of how is the negative rhetoric of this year affecting voter confidence, especially all of the criticisms about vote by mail, right? So you have several politicians saying vote by mail is not secure, vote by mail is a risk, it opens up for fraud. And how does that actually affect the general population's view, the public's view of vote by mail and ballot security?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Michael, and thanks to all of our viewers. This is another in our series of videos on resilient elections. We encourage you to follow us on YouTube. You can subscribe by searching for Resilient Elections. You can also like us on Facebook, same address, Resilient Elections. If you wish to learn more about Lisa Bryant, you might want to follow her on Twitter. She's @PoliSciGirl. My name is Paul Gronke. I'd like to thank Lisa Bryant of California State University, Fresno, and Michael Alvarez of Caltech. And that's it for this time. We'll see you next time in Resilient Elections. Thank you.
Thank you.